We've just recorded another powerful X-ray X-class flare from the Sun, this time reaching X4. Ling, it's the fourth X-class flare in just a few days, and all came from the same sunspot group. The same group previously produced three major flares, X1, see X1, R, and X5. These flares were accompanied by coronal mass ejections that hurtled toward Earth, triggering the recently concluded G4, G5 storm. Auroras were even spotted in places as unusual as Mexico and Spain, highlighting the unusual intensity of the geomagnetic storm. In the latest X4, zero flare, only a small amount of material was directed toward Earth as a shock front, while the majority of the plasma appeared to have escaped ahead of Earth's orbit. What has caught many people's attention this month, however, is that the series of powerful solar flares seems to strangely coincide with the orbits of three comets that are approaching the Sun in turn: Atlas 3I, the Lemon Atlas A6, and the Atlas T1. Atlas 3I passed perihelion on October 29, Atlas A6 on November 7-8, and the Atlas T1 will reach perihelion on December 3. During each comet's approach to the Sun, observations recorded large flares, as if solar activity were accelerating in tandem with the motion of these objects. Interestingly, the current group of sunspots formed more than a month ago, when they were still on Earth's hidden side, around the time A6 and T1 were approaching the Sun. However, the group was not yet strong enough to cause a major outburst. It was only when it returned and aligned with Comet 3I on October 21 that the outbursts really began. The next orbit, when the group again fell into a near alignment with A6 and T1, caused the strong outbursts leading to the intense geomagnetic storm we just experienced. And now, as the Sun returns to a near correspondence with Atlas 3I, the group is showing signs of activity again after a few days of silence since the X5 one outburst. From a scientific perspective, the above sequence of events may simply be a coincidence in the dynamics of the solar system, as there is currently no evidence that comets can directly influence the Sun's activity. However, for those who love fringe theories, the repeated coincidence of comet positions and the increased solar flare activity remains a fascinating question. The answer may become clearer when Comet T1 Atlas reaches perihelion in early December, when many observers are waiting to see if the Sun will continue to produce flares. It will be especially noteworthy if the solar flare continues until November 17-18, because shortly afterward, around November 19-20, a rare planetary configuration will occur that coincides with a new moon. During this time, the Sun, Mercury, Moon, Earth, and Uranus will be almost aligned, only about 2 degrees apart in their orbital planes. This is also the time when Mercury will pass through a secondary conjunction, a configuration where the Sun, Mercury, and Earth are in a straight line. Coincidentally, the Moon will be at its furthest point in its orbit, creating a super new moon, while Uranus will enter a perfect opposition to Earth and the Sun. This will make the ice giant the brightest in the sky, almost like a full moon of Uranus itself. The combination of all these conditions creates a rare pattern of alignments that is widespread throughout the solar system. From the resonance between Saturn and Neptune near the conjunction of the long-term solar cycle to the delicate conjunctions between Pluto, Jupiter, and Venus, the entire configuration creates a complex dynamic field that many astronomers describe as a highlight of planetary order this year. Many believe that the high energy flux of these configurations has contributed to the powerful space weather events that have been evident in a series of intense solar flares, including the X40 event that caused a widespread R3 radio blackout across Eurasia. Africa, which is located in a hemisphere that is tilted strongly toward the sun, was particularly affected. Another unusual feature of the recent series of flares is their near-perfect clockwise rhythm. All of the major flares occurred within 3 hours of their respective universal time. The first flare occurred at 7:30 UTC on November 9, followed by 2 at 9:10 UTC on November 10, then the X52 flare at 1004 UTC on November 11, and finally the November 14 flare at 8:30 UTC. On all 4 occasions, the part of the Earth directly facing the Sun fell into exactly the same time zone, a striking regularity that almost synchronized, leading many to question whether this was just a coincidence or some kind of as yet unrecognized cosmic rhythm. Along with solar activity, experts are also closely monitoring seismic developments on Earth, including the latest earthquake in Japan, amid a sharp increase in the level of space energy volatility. The rest of November, along with a series of planetary configurations that will continue into December and even early January, promises to continue to bring many interesting developments to observe. In particular, January 9 will mark an extremely rare event, a near-perfect alignment of the 6 planets: Jupiter, Earth, the Sun, Mercury, Venus, and Mars. This configuration has only appeared in decades and is considered one of the most remarkable patterns of the year. All of these factors will continue to be analyzed in great detail as new space weather data, particularly related to the X40 outbreak, become available. The dynamic picture that is unfolding across the solar system thus becomes more vivid, complex, and dramatic, opening up a particularly exciting observational period for scientists and astronomers. The most striking thing about this flare was its intensity. From the moment it began, in a split second, the proton density spiked, followed by a stream of high-energy particles, including high-speed protons, alpha particles, electrons, and highly charged ions, all traveling close to the speed of light. The sudden increase in the entire stream was a clear sign that this was a powerful solar flare, because the Earth is in a favorable magnetic connection with the Sun. The effects of this flare were all the more noticeable. Previously, 3 consecutive explosions, including one with a proton flux exceeding 500 megaelectron volts, were all directed directly at Earth and were considered worrisome events. Looking at the X-ray chart, the power of the flare sequence is clear. The latest one reached X4, Ling, following the previous 3 X1, C, X1, 2, and X5, E. This is one of the strongest flare sequences of the current solar cycle. The question is whether this sequence of activity will continue. Before that, there was a temporary lull as the sunspot group moved away from the position of the comet T1 Atlas. But when the orbit brought the sunspot group back closer to the comet 3I Atlas, the activity resumed, leading to the X40 that was just recorded. This suggests that the period of 3I Atlas's co-location with the Sun may have lasted longer than expected. Another curious point is 3I Atlas itself. Some have theorized that the comet may have originated from a distant star system or even from outside the galaxy based on its unusual motion and resonance frequencies. While this is still speculation, the fact remains that Atlas 3I is very close to the Sun after perihelion and has begun to reform its cometary tail. In this position, it is vulnerable to powerful sweeps from the Sun's wind and high energy flares, which could change its structure or path in unpredictable ways. Time-lapse images from observatories show that much of the X4 zero plasma was not headed directly toward Earth. However, the halo surrounding the eruption suggests that the shock wave may have still impacted our planet, though only strong enough to create a G1 to G2 storm. Most of the ejecta appears to have skimmed off the side of Earth. The real-time stereoscopic data showed the eruption was about 30 degrees ahead of Earth's orbit and was pushed westward, which is consistent with the Atlas 3I's position at the time of the CME's release. NOAA's space weather model showed similar results, although the simulations did not extend beyond 90 degrees. Stereo A images also showed that the plasma jet may have extended farther than expected. The instrument was predicted to be exposed to a high density of plasma as the CME passed, confirming that the primary eruption was not aimed at Earth. If there was an impact, it was a light, high-velocity hit, not enough to trigger a storm beyond the G2 level, which was enough to produce auroras, but did not seriously impact infrastructure. Aurora hunters can keep their hopes up as solar cycle 25 is currently in its peak phase and will continue to fluctuate wildly over the next few years. From now until around 2030, flares will continue to occur regularly, although they will gradually decrease in intensity as the cycle progresses. Just a few days ago, Earth experienced the third strongest solar storm and third strongest geomagnetic storm of the cycle, a clear sign that the peak solar activity is not over yet. In coronagraph mode, space observatories allow us to clearly track the path of any solar storm or plasma jet, whether it is shooting straight toward Earth or radiating off in some other direction. Meanwhile, at 100 or 130 angstroms, flares heading directly toward us appear sharply along with the sunspot group facing Earth. Observing over time, it can be seen that this group of sunspots gradually rotates towards the edge of the sun, disappears from view, and then reappears on the opposite side after a rotation cycle. A remarkable detail is that during the time the group of sunspots grows, its direction of growth is always marked by an arrow vector, and this arrow constantly coincides with the position of its unstable magnetic field. This is the epicenter that created the recent strong outbreak chain, at the same time developing into the largest and most complex sunspot region in the past several months. In the early stages, when the sunspot cluster was at 0 degrees, meaning directly facing Earth, the trackers set their vectors pointing outward, precisely at the angle of the instability zone. Meanwhile, observations of the structure of the solar system showed that comets A6 Lemon and T1 Atlas were located above the ecliptic plane, a position higher than the normal orbital plane of the planets. Because the top-down view often obscures the orbital height, this was not easily seen. Comet 3 Atlas, though outside Earth's orbit, was still inside Mars's orbit and was located almost exactly at the intersection of the ecliptic plane. One thing to note, when A6 Lemon and T1 Atlas were still close together, the sun's activity was still quite weak. The sunspot group was still in its development phase, not strong enough to cause a major flare. Everything changed when the sunspot group began to coincide with Comet 3, I Atlas. On October 21, right, when 3I Atlas was in line with Earth, a major flare and a powerful CME occurred that same day. In the scientific community, most researchers attribute this to a coincidence of perspective and orbit. However, for those interested in more complex patterns of interaction in astronomy, these near-exact matches continue to raise the question, are there some subtle forms of gravitational resonance or magnetic interaction between interstellar objects and solar flare activity that are not yet fully described by current science weeks of observations reveal the clear rhythm from the time the spots formed. Small flares occurred continuously. By October 21, the first major flare appeared as Comet 1 Atlas reached perihelion on October 29. The sun entered a period of continuous flares, which then faded for a few days. But as soon as the spots returned to their alignment with Comet A6 Lemon, another series of flares occurred, and then as it continued to rotate toward T1 Atlas, another major flare occurred. This pattern repeats itself regularly throughout late October and early November, forming a remarkable cyclical sequence of activity as the sun enters the peak phase of cycle 25. It is worth noting that during the time when Comet A6 Lemon and T1 Atlas were close together, the sunspot group was still too young to produce M-class flares without any significant CMEs. It was only when the comet began moving closer to 3I Atlas that the activity increased significantly. When we rewind the data, we see that the October 21 flare, a powerful solar flare accompanied by a CME, occurred just as the sunspot was facing the sun where 3I Atlas is located. Although not perfectly aligned, the positions at that time were close enough to produce a strong interaction. This intense activity lasted until the perihelion of Comet 3I Atlas on October 29. The sensitive time zone around this comet appears to be huge, as solar activity spikes during perihelion and only tapers off around November 3. And on November 3, another flare appeared the second or third of the month, lying exactly in line with the A6 star, continuing the cycle. After a brief lull on November 9, the sun unleashed its next powerful X-class burst, just as the sunspot cluster was heading straight for Earth and T1 Atlas. In addition to comets, the positions of the planets also contributed to the resonance. On October 21, Venus was very close to the alignment and may have received the full force of the powerful burst, while 3I Atlas was located behind in the same configuration. On November 3, Mercury aligned with A6 Lemon, forming a new conjunction. This was followed by a series of 3 X-class flares, E, C, E, R, and 5, E, occurring just as Earth and Atlas T, one aligned with the sunspot group. Shortly after today, we saw another X4, 0 flare, occurring in a very similar alignment, while Atlas 3, I moved closer and closer to a square with Earth, a position that is often sensitive to strong solar activity. On its current trajectory, 3I Atlas's closest approach to Earth, barring any disturbances that change its path, will be on December 19. But right now, the Sun is ramping up activity toward the region of space that 3i Atlas will pass through in the coming days. And on November 19 and 20, we're about to enter a major planetary geometry event, another strange coincidence at a time when the solar system is becoming more unusual than ever. When analyzing the positions of celestial bodies during this period, we can see that Mercury is gradually approaching its lower conjunction with the Sun, which means that the Mercury-Cassini phase is approaching. At this time, Mercury is in its retrograde phase and moving straight into that position. At the same time, the Moon is entering its new moon phase. And because we have just experienced the largest full moon of the year at its closest position to Earth, this new moon will become a supermoon at its farthest point in its orbit, quite close to Mercury in terms of the zodiac. This is a factor that attracts the attention of astronomical observers. In this configuration, the Sun, Mercury, Moon, and Earth form a rare alignment. As the range widens further, Uranus simultaneously enters perfect opposition to the Sun and Earth. Three consecutive events occurring at exactly the same time blend together into a geometric configuration so precise it is almost impressive. But this is just part of the larger planetary geometry at play this month. Saturn and Neptune are in heliocentric conjunction, marking a pivotal point in a roughly 37-year conjunction cycle that only occurs every few decades. At the same time, Uranus forms a nearly 60-degree angle to the Saturn-Neptune pair, and Pluto is at a similar angle, helping to shape this unique resonance. The November 20 conjunction between Uranus, Earth, Moon, Mercury, and the Sun is therefore at the heart of this geometric pattern. It can coincide with significant upheavals, although their manifestations are difficult to predict, from increased solar activity, strong geomagnetic storms, to other possibilities such as seismic changes, increased volcanic activity, or unpredictable social impacts. The planetary alignment does not determine the specific outcome, but often marks major changes in the space environment. As we continue toward early January, an even rarer event is taking place. Around January 9, the planets in our solar system reach a near-perfect alignment. We've seen this pattern begin to form since late December, but on January 9, the structure becomes most apparent. Jupiter, the largest planet and most magnetic body in the solar system, aligns with Earth. On the other side of the axis, Mercury, Venus, and Mars form a near-perfect alignment, creating a powerful resonance. Pluto, though slightly off-axis, remains within the structure's sphere of influence, while Saturn and Neptune continue to maintain their long-standing near-perfect alignment. The January 9th conjunction is predicted to be significantly stronger than the November 19-20th configuration. No one can say for sure what will happen, but it is the convergence of three different Cassini cycles with Mercury, Venus, and Mars, while Jupiter simultaneously enters its annual opposition period. An incredible coincidence of astronomical factors, enough to keep observers closely watching for any developments. Seismic data over the past week shows a series of strong earthquakes centered mainly off the coast of Japan. The latest magnitude, the Time quake, occurred at 2000 UTC yesterday, indicating that the region remains unstable. Although the frequency has decreased slightly, there have been more than 24 earthquakes of magnitude 5, 0 or higher, several magnitude through Ling, and the largest of magnitude 6, 8 and 6, Ling coinciding with 3 X-level outbreaks on the 9th, 10th, and 11th. The area remained a high-risk area throughout November, especially with all the activity taking place near the site of the 1 magnitude earthquake in 2011. The seismic profile was similar to the period leading up to that earthquake, except there was no magnitude 7 earthquake. In 2011, a magnitude at set 3 earthquake occurred 2 days before the 9, Uno quake coinciding with a spike in solar activity directed at Earth. This surprising repeat has led to the area being monitored even more closely. In particular, most of today's earthquakes are shallow, only about 10 kilometers or even shallower. This increases the risk of seafloor displacement, which could lead to a tsunami if a major fault ruptures. Fortunately, Tokyo is quite far from the current epicenter, but a strong earthquake could still have widespread effects. Therefore, the Japanese region still needs to be closely monitored, especially on November 19 and 20, when an important planetary configuration involving the moon will appear, which could add further resonance to an area that has been very sensitive over the past few days. The moon is a force that influences earthquake activity, but not the biggest force. But they show that the lunar phase, especially the full moon and the new moon, causes an increase of about 0.5 to 1% in earthquakes. But they also show that the large magnitude earthquakes seem to be concentrated around the time of the new moon or the full moon. So this makes sense in a way that when the moon is aligned with the sun, that is when the tides are stronger, that is the ocean tides and the earth tides, the vertical displacement of the earth creates stress and increases cracking in the fault zones. That is how it works. And then a big geologic storm comes and changes the flow of energy around our planet. In the next few months, we'll have a multi-band radiation belt structure. In about 2 months, we'll have 2 radiation belts. We'll start to form a 3rd and a 4th belt very soon, because that's the powerful impact of a solar storm. You know, we don't really understand how that affects the geophysical aspects of the interior, but we do know that there's a connection between the space environment, the atmospheric environment, and the lithosphere environment, the crust, the mantle, and the core. So there's a lot going on right now. It's good to be aware of that. With the radiation belts expected to increase from 2 to 3 or 4 in the coming months, it's hard not to wonder if we're witnessing a rare natural cycle or a cosmic energy reconfiguration of Earth. The changes from space to the atmosphere down to the core and mantle add to the mystery, as if there's a hidden mechanism behind all the events. Are these just coincidences or signals of a larger energy cycle that humanity has yet to decipher? If you want to continue following these strange things, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any important updates. We have a lot to discover